Hello, I'm Nancy Clanton. I'm president of Clanton Associates, and we specialize in lighting design, mostly for sustainable communities and net zero energy projects. I'm really pleased to introduce you all to the Model Lighting Ordinance, which we fondly refer to as the MLO. I was the task force president or chairperson of this particular committee, and working jointly with the International Dark Sky Association with the Illuminating Engineering Society of North America. And it's great that the two organizations work together so we could get a model lighting ordinance that is actually going to be environmentally friendly, but with technical soundness behind it. So here is an outline of some of the topics I'm going to be discussing. First question, why do we need an outdoor lighting ordinance? Why is this even important? Why do communities want to do one? The second thing, we'll actually dip our toe into the model lighting ordinance and see a general overview. Part of that is going to be understanding that you can control lighting. And the big topic, which is important for city planners especially, is implementing what we call lighting zones into your city. Then we will actually look at compliance paths, which would include prescriptive and performance, and then look at the bug ratings, those little critters. No, they're not insects, but they actually stand for Backlight, Uplight, and Glare ratings of Luminaires. And then finally, we'll look at additional MLO information. How does this apply to residential lighting or to street lighting? Okay, let's jump in. So you are a city and you really would like to consider an outdoor lighting ordinance. Well, why? What is the instigator of an outdoor lighting ordinance? Sometimes it's neighbor-to-neighbor complaints. Other times you have a community of really great astronomers, and they would like to be able to see the stars more. A couple of cities actually have energy goals that they want to reduce the amount of energy within their city, and outdoor lighting has been targeted as one of those ideas of doing that. Some cities they want the aesthetics. They don't want big floodlights around. They want to be able to soften the lighting and to get some commonality with it. But regardless on what your purpose for an outdoor lighting ordinance is, you need some champions within the city to actually shepherd it through. This may start with the planning board, or sometimes it's even started with the city council. And working down, it could be that a neighbor has complained about the outdoor lighting and the city council has gone to the planning board and the planning staff and say, hey, do you know anything about it? Well, fortunately, we now have a model lighting ordinance, which, like I mentioned, was developed jointly by two outstanding organizations to make sure that the ordinance actually is technically sound, but also will do some of the missions that you would want to do. So it's built on the IES criteria, and again, the IES is the Illuminating Engineering Society. This is a society that actually puts out recommendations for how many foot candles or how much light do you need in a parking lot or on a street. But they also get into how much glare is too much that will affect visibility. The IES has what they call a technical memorandum 15. That's a fancy word for saying that it looks at outdoor fixtures or luminaires and will start analyzing the amount of light they put out and actually assign some different types of ratings for them. So you can begin to see what's going to be more appropriate in a residential setting versus in a commercial setting. So briefly, the MLO is the whole premise of it is that they really want to reduce the impact of excessive outdoor lighting. It's not necessarily good design, but it's for the excessive use to try and minimize the impact. And many times the MLO will make the reference to the night sky. How can you see the night sky? How does it reduce the sky glow? And we also know that there are some real negative effects with light at night on the biological cycles of humans, but also our flora and fauna. They can't go and shut the shades. They cannot turn off the lights. You know, it's only been in the last 100, maybe 150 years that we actually have electric night at night. Remember back in World War II when you could actually black out a city because they were worried about the air raids? We no longer can do that. And I think it's the state of Vermont that came up with the term of, we have now ratcheting outdoor lighting, and it keeps going up and up and up. And one neighbor says, well, I've got to be safer than my other neighbor. They have a really high light level, so I need even more. Well, this has got to stop. And I think communities are really looking at this, and many residences are up in arms over how outdoor lighting has been ratcheted. And let's face it, lights on, energy is being used, and it's being wasted energy. So the MLO is going to address those issues, and it's really designed to aid municipalities in helping looking at new and retrofit type of lighting systems. It will help you evaluate what these systems are and how they can be designed to minimize sky glow. And sky glow, again, is that glow of light over a city, or light trespass. And light trespass is going to be that neighbor to neighbor complaining, hey, that light's on and shining my bedroom window at night. The other thing that communities really like is consistency. If it's zoned as residential, they don't want one property to be super bright. They want everything to at least blend in so that there's not a huge light, like in this picture, a big, huge spotlight in the middle of a residential community. But what we've also heard from cities is that it has to be enforceable. Whatever metrics we put out there, you need to have a way of getting back and making sure that the code enforcers can go out and measure the impact. So with enforceability, that starts at the city planning department. When you get an application in, a land use zoning application, that you want to look at that, make sure that the city planners understand whether the applicant has met the model lighting ordinance or not. And then once it's approved, that it's actually installed the way that it was the applicant had applied for. So your code officials need to be able to go out and enforce it. By the way, we did have a planning department member on the Model Lighting Ordinance Task Force, and she was fabulous in really dialing it back to language that different planning departments can use and can't use. And so with her help, we're hoping that this is really an ordinance that is easily to understand. Basically, the application of it, it is for all exterior lighting. It's new and replacement lighting, the whole shebang. And I think that a lot of planning zoning boards already have regulations in place that will kick in maybe a remodel into whether you have to go through new zoning. So the Model Lighting Ordinance is not going to get into the language that is specific to different communities. We're going to let you define that. All we're trying to do is to give you the technical language for lighting. And that's really important. This is almost a code that goes within your land use regulations. And it's extremely important that you decide What does new lighting mean? What does replacement lighting mean? Is it 25% improvement? That's all up to the individual communities. Now, there are some exemptions that we put in, and it's up to the community to allow or even expand these exemptions. I've highlighted street lighting because as an option at the very end of the Model Lighting Ordinance, we have an optional code for street lighting, and that's only if the community kind of wants to regulate itself. But otherwise, all these other things can be added to. These were just the items that the Model Lighting Ordinance Task Force decided was important. So I mentioned controls. What does that have to do with it? Well, we took a lot of this language similar to sign codes, where many times once the establishment was closed, your sign had to be turned off at a certain time. So we use that same kind of logic and saying, well, lighting could be reduced too. And this has been backed up now by some energy codes. The national code, ASHRAE 90.1, now is saying that you need to set your lighting, exterior lighting, back to a certain point. Title 24 in California also has setback requirements. So we're doing the same thing here. You really need to be able to reduce the lighting by at least 30% and hopefully even more. And research has shown now that you can set lighting back and have no reduction in safety and security. And this is huge, that the visibility is not compromised by setting your lighting back. There are some exemptions, of course, like for instance, if things are motion activated. But again, these exemptions are only a guideline. We want to make sure that the city can tailor this code to its specific needs. So there's some homework you need to do when you adopt a model lighting ordinance. You have to actually take your land use zones and overlay lighting zones on top of them. And the lighting zones start at lighting zone 0 and go all the way up to lighting zone 4. Please note that lighting zone 4 is extremely high levels of light and really not a default. For instance, right now in the state of California, which has adopted lighting zones, there is not one lighting zone 4 in the entire state of California. So I'm going to go through each of the lighting zones individually so you get a flavor of where you could apply these lighting zones to your land use zones. Lighting zone 0 is precious. This is where there really is no permanent lighting. There may be some permanent lighting, but it's not expected to be on for the entire evening. It's on for a short amount of time. And it's the default, for areas within a city that are parks or wilderness area or any areas that are protected, maybe around waterways. It's also for undeveloped areas and some rural areas. We have known some rural communities that have really chosen to adopt lighting zone 0. They just don't want their lights on. I live in a community very similar to that up in the mountains of Colorado. And nobody has his porch light on all night long. In fact, we walk around with flashlights. And that's kind of what is the whole genre of that particular community. Then we dip into lighting zone 1. Lighting zone 1 is really excellent for residential areas. There may be some small towns that, they're lighting zone 1. There's really no more light you need. And it ratchets down the light and, of course, puts a lot of limit on glare and backlight into the properties. Lighting zone 2 is, now we're getting to build more moderate ambient lighting. And this would be a great lighting zone for in a light commercial area or in a place, with a lot of business districts. definitely a lighting zone if you've got a lot of mixed-use residential areas. And mixed use, of course, you know, is where you may have commercial on the first floor and apartments or condos on the second floors. By the way, some cities are even looking at vertical zoning, where the main street level is one zone. This may be lighting zone 2, but the residential up above on floors 2, 3, and 4 and above may be lighting zone 1. And this is really easy to do. Other areas that are within lighting zone 1, you may want churches or schools that are within a lighting zone 1, or a gas station that's in a small town. They can all be lighting zone 2 within a lighting zone 1 area. Lighting zone 3, this is definitely moderately high, and this will be for large cities. It could also be if you've got shopping malls or car dealerships. Depending on how large of a city you are, this would be kind of the default for large cities, business districts. And it could even be for some playing fields, as long as they're not near a lighting zone 1 area. Some communities, similar to your land use zones, you may not allow a jump in lighting zones. If you are a lighting zone 1 residential area, we would not recommend you put a lighting zone 3 adjacent to it. You need to only go to lighting zone 2 and then do the gradual increase to a lighting zone 3 area. Oh yes, lighting zone 4. Okay, maybe for Times Square, Las Vegas. Oh, it's here because we needed something for these unique situations. But like I mentioned, it is not a default, and only in the rare cases where there would be a lighting zone 4. Now let's go into the different methods of compliance. And there's basically 2 different ways. The prescriptive method, which is the simple method and kind of tells you, if you're in this lighting zone, here's the type of equipment and here's how much light you're allowed. Performance is much more difficult. This actually takes computer modeling, and you would almost need a lighting designer on the project. And performance is highly harder, complex sites, and a lot more complicated to get through. The majority of cities and communities may only have prescriptive methods and have the performance method as maybe special land use or a special case, and not necessarily for the general public or the general applications to go through. But that's your choice. So in the methods of compliance, we have here kind of outlined the path that you would take with the prescriptive method. And there's 2 different ways you can go. You can either do the parking lot or parking space method or the prescriptive hardscape. But both of them do have regulations on the type of lights that you put in them. Again, how much backlight, uplight, and glare that they have, which is going to limit the offsite impacts. So here's an example of the prescriptive with just how much light do you get per parking lot. Very simple. You add up the number of parking spaces and you multiply it by how much light you get per space. Now, I've been talking about this, how much light you get per space. What does that mean? Well, lighting fixtures or luminaires or light sources put out what we call lumens. And if you look at a standard light bulb in the packaging, it will have what we call a lumen rating. How much light does it come out? So we're using that, and we're taking so many lumens divided by space, depending on the different lighting zone you have. Now, there's one thing, we have limited it up to just 10 spaces. And because these are kind of designed for the mom and pops, where you're not going to have a lighting engineer on staff or on the project, you may not even have an electrical engineer at all. and just the contractor. So this is designed for very simple applications. If you can't meet that, then we have the prescriptive method. And here, what is shown is that we've got the different lighting zones and a base allowance. And this base allowance is how many lumens per square foot of hardscape. And we use the per square foot of hardscape, realizing that you may get that already in your application when the applicant's doing a drainage plan and they're trying to figure out of how much hardscape there is. The only difference is the drainage plan may have the footprint of the building included in it. And this particular square foot of hardscape, it would not have the building footprint in, so you would have to subtract that out. But you basically get so much light per square foot of hardscape, and these are tradable base allowances. In addition to that, you have additional allowances that are non-tradable, kind of the use it or lose it. And these are for particular type of applicants: outdoor sales frontage, drive-up windows, and service stations or gas stations. They get extra, but it's only for these type of areas, and they are non-tradable and use it or lose it. So that's the prescriptive method. It's pretty darn simple. Now I'm going to get into the performance method. And the performance method, if you remember, it is a lot more complicated and it involves a computer programming. And what you basically do is you put a box, kind of a glass box around your site. And there's two different things you want to look at in the performance method. When you add up all the lights and all the lumens that are coming out of each light, once you put it into the program, some light's going to hit the ground and reflect up to the box. Other light is going to go straight from the light up to the box, like in those two cases. And you add up all of that, including the reflected light, and you have to be less than 15% of the entire total site lumen limit, how much light you get on. Now, within the total site lumen limits, you have a certain amount of light that you can do per square foot, exactly like the prescriptive method, except it's a lot lower because we are allowing a lot more extra things to be added onto it, more untradable lights. We do have another thing that we've got in here because in the performance method, the bug ratings do not necessarily comply with it. And with that, then we're saying, okay, let's look at this box. We want to make sure that you don't have at any point in the box more than this type of foot candle levels. It's a vertical foot candle. So in lighting zone 2, at any point in the box, you can't have more than 0.3 foot candles hitting that box. And this is to prevent someone from putting a floodlight right at the edge of the property and shining it straight out into someone's eyes. And so that way you still have to have a good design to do that. With both methods, we do what we call this magic bug rating. And this is a luminaire classification system that you can get bug ratings on any luminaire that you have from the manufacturer. It's printed on the spec sheets, very, very easy to do. Some of you may have lighting ordinances that uses older, outdated technology of full cutoff and non-cutoff. That is no longer the technology used with the IES. It's been replaced with the bug rating. And here's kind of how the bug rating comes about. We take a light and we put it and we do a light measurement or a photometric test all the way around it. And we have these different zones of light from 0 to 30 degrees, 30 to 60 and upwards. We have regulations on you can't put in this G rating so many lumens in this zone, and you add all the zones together, And that would be the glare zone or the backlight behind the luminaire. You can't have too much light going behind the luminaire and then the uplight, which would be on top of the luminaire. And here are basically what the bug ratings are, depending on where you're located on the property. And it's pretty easy. Notice that U0 matches up with lighting zone 0, and U1 matches up with lighting zone 1, and the similar things with glare. So a bug 1 with U1 and G1 all are with lighting zone 1. Reason why I say backlight varies, it's because it depends on how close you are to the property line. The closer you are, the more restricted the backlight's going to be. There are some exceptions to this simple rule. It basically is tightening down the uplight and the glare rating depending on certain circumstances. For instance, if you're in parking lots or just utilitarian lighting, you have to have a U0. We're basically saying you really don't need uplight. Those are more for decorative lights, and it's a waste. It contributes to sky glow, glare, and all of that. There may be a little higher G rating if you're a wall sconce on a building that's facing a street with a 0 lot line. So we've got some exceptions there for it. But let's go through some typical luminaires and how do they look for as far as where they would be accepted in different lighting zones. A 250 watt high pressure sodium flat lens cobra head, please note they're only will be allowed in lighting zone 3 and lighting zone 4. The old SAG lens cobra head, 150 watt, only in lighting zone 4. And then, of course, these barn lights, they fail in all zones. So these types of lights that we've grown up with, all of a sudden we're going to need a whole new genre of luminaires that will be able to meet the different bug ratings. Now, for your residential clients, they're not going to know what bugs are. They're not going to have the type of equipment. This is something you can go down to your hardware store and buy. And so there we actually have a much different table to show on how you can apply for residential only. The way we've limited it, because we don't have bug ratings, we only really allow one unshielded luminaire, and that usually is at the main entrance. The rest of them is fully shielded if you want to put out any substantial light. And if you have more unshielded luminaires, they're more or less glowing things, and they don't put out a lot of light. So you can have some decoratives, but they won't really contribute to glare at all. And then finally, I mentioned that there is a street lighting option. And with the street lighting option, you basically were encouraging you to do a master plan. And a lot of cities will say, well, if I'm in the middle of a lighting zone 1 residential area, I think that our streets should also be lighting zone 1. We should at least comply to what the private property owners have to do. And that's the simple way of applying the street lighting option. But one thing about street lighting, you cannot have uplight. It all has to be 0. And the only time you are allowed something different than U0, we're asking that you actually ask the residents if that's what they want. So it's kind of special permit only to actually involve the community into allowing more uplight and more glare into their community. So that's kind of the MLO. It's a pretty simple way. It's not complicated. There are several cities that have adopted it. I would say that the city of Plymouth, Minnesota has been using it for several years and has had really good success in it. Their city planners have not been challenged at all by using it. And they're actually kind of going out and looking at lighting and adding more to it. You can add maybe the color of the light, and you can add maybe other features. that you would want specific for your community. But please remember that the Model Lighting Ordinance is the technical side of what you would have as a general ordinance. Quite a few years ago, we went through and did an assessment of outdoor lighting in California. And we noticed that only 33% of all the lights in California were fully shielded, which would be our U0. Most of the lighting, or 48% of the lighting, had absolutely no control at all. So there is a huge impact that we can do as a community or within your community to actually stop the high impact of sky glow and to minimize this neighbor to neighbor type of complaints, and to get it, just like any other regulation, to start controlling lighting. So what are the next steps? We really need to encourage communities like you to adopt this lighting ordinance. IDA will have education for city planners. You can actually ask the International Dark Sky Association to come in and help your city planners implement a model lighting ordinance, and to go through and work with the city planners on what does it mean. It's actually a living document. We want to hear what's working and what's not working. These numbers can be adjusted. What we have heard is that the performance method is producing higher light levels than what a lot of cities really want. Those are now being in the process of being lowered and to be more in line with the prescriptive method. What's on our wish list? Ooh, electronic signs. I bet a lot of you have got electronic signs creeping into your communities, and we are definitely looking at that. Quite a few large cities are taking electronic signs and limiting the brightness of them and whether they can change message. And if they can, how often they can do it. Probably no blinking and all of that. But that's definitely the next steps for the model lighting ordinance in order to do that. So thank you very much for listening with this. We will entertain questions either remotely or as a live audience, depending on what type of venue that this presentation will be heard. But thank you very much. And here is the website for the International Dark Sky Association, www.darksky.org, where you can download a complimentary version of the Model Lighting Ordinance. Thank you very much.